Yeah, so I guess the next, the other question was with EDS, like what attracted you to her story the most? Obviously, location played a big part, I assume, because you could actually get there and film it.
Mhm.
But in terms of how did EDS and Paralympics fit into kind of, in the importance of, sorry, I guess what was the importance of EDS in terms of, the story you were trying to tell?
Yeah, so when I kind of discovered Tori's online presence, I didn't really EDS wasn't mentioned too often. At least I don't think it was specifically mentioned on the Team USA profile page of her. But it's through my initial discussions where she mentioned EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is also something I had never heard of. So this film ended up being a way for me to explore and hopefully allow the audience to explore with me. What is this world of parafencing? What is this world of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome? And how do these things affect the individuals that either have it or take part in the sport? And so EDS and Tori go hand in hand. I mean, she was an able-bodied fencer, and then she had to choose, or she had to move into wheelchair fencing because she had EDS. And so there's just no way to ever tell a story without explaining what EDS is, bringing in more about EDS. And I'd say in earlier cuts, we focus on EDS even more with an outside expert. And then when we decide to focus more on make it more of a personal portrait story of Tori, we decided to have EDS explained through her and um, through her moments with it. We have her self-shot videos of her legs reacting with symptoms. And yeah, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, it affects a fair amount of people, and but was still something I was very unfamiliar with. So I felt it was a very important aspect of the story. And then since the sports aspect of getting to the Paralympics didn't really pan out, EDS became an even more important aspect of the story because, Tori doesn't let it define her, but it is such a large part of her life.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think, from my perspective in starting the film festival, that's one of the most important things is, cause-based films, whether it's, a medical issue, racial equality issue. A lot of these stories relate to life, and not only relate to life, it's how people live their life, right? I mean, she's, really using sport is a major focus of having a full and rounded quality of life. And helps her get over certain obstacles, and learn how to get over others. One of the things that was interesting when I met with her and interviewed her, was that what she said is she basically self-diagnosed. She was basically self-diagnosed, which I think is a huge issue in kind of the medical field in this country, because if it's not something that's normal or known, doctors tend not to think out of the box a lot of the time. I mean, I've got 3.5-year-old twins, and one of the things I was talking to her about is that, there were some complications when my wife was pregnant, and at 19 weeks, doctors were just like, "You need to terminate both babies." And we're like, "What?" We're like, "How? Well, why?" And they're like, "Well, one's too small, and the other one has fluid in the brain," and they're like, So we were, of course, we're devastated. We're like, "Well, shouldn't we like wait a little while? We have some time." We couldn't, one of the things we didn't get was they weren't bringing her in for ultrasounds on a regular basis. So we didn't have a way to compare if this was like, just how they were formed, or if this was, progressively going to get worse. And I mean, switched pretty soon after that, actually to Columbia Hospital in New York. And they were amazing. They're like, "Look, you got to follow this, you got to track it, you got to have the information." And, we were going for ultrasounds once every 2 weeks, and then once a week, and then twice a week. But luckily the kids were fine. But it's kind of, if we didn't kind of put our foot down to the doctor and say, "Wait, this doesn't really make sense to us. Like, and what's the rush? Why is this all of a sudden?" Probably wouldn't have kids right now. And I think that it's, I mean, I personally know how infuriating it is for a doctor to say, "Well, that's just the way it is. I'm the doctor. You know, you should believe me." And that was obviously a big issue with COVID at the beginning. Nobody, people didn't know what to do. They didn't know what they had. The testing wasn't there, and if they weren't diagnosed with it, early, they didn't know how to treat it, or what they were going through. And that's, I think that's something that I think we can kind of all bring light to, and hopefully that gets changed. I mean, obviously the medical professionals aren't doing stuff on purpose to not diagnose people, but the more awareness there is in general, then the easier it is for doctors to diagnose this stuff.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting to hear Tori explain her journey of developing EDS and then self-diagnosing herself, because when we spoke to the EDS expert, I'll call her, she's the president of the Ehlers-Danlos Society, everything she said about EDS just mirrored what Tori said. So many people are misdiagnosed, aren't diagnosed properly, are told they have something completely different when they start to realize, when everyone does their own research, like, I think I have this Ehlers-Danlos syndrome thing. Why aren't I being diagnosed? And then since I've started this film, I've done more research. I've joined these online communities with Ehlers-Danlos folks, and they all have the same story. It's such an unknown disease still that it's just the research isn't there to properly diagnose it. And so Tori's story is incredible of her self-diagnosis, and she is definitely not the only one who's had to do that.
Yeah. Well, so what's your kind of goal with the film? Short term, long term? If I'm asking you, like, as a festival, like, how can we potentially help because get your story out there? Like, what's your goal?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, just getting the messaging and story out there. Just like I said, I was fascinated in the process of learning what parafencing and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome were, that I'm happy to kind of share that information out in the world. So the more people that learn about that stuff, the better, in my opinion. And then also, it's just such a weird time to have a film come out. And so my partner and I have already agreed, hey, if we get into a few festivals, that's great. So many are getting canceled. So many are online. And it's like, who knows what's going on? So typically with this process, people would do a big film festival circuit, try to get it distributed, whatnot. And we're just going to be happy if we get it into a few festivals. And then, our goal these days, it seems like a common goal, is to get onto something like Netflix or a streaming service, just so more people can see it. And, the more people get to see this and learn about it, the better. But it's just, we think it's a story that can last for years, but also we recognize with the Paralympics now supposedly happening next August, if they even go through now, we do want this story to be told and shared as widely as possible before next August, just because it'll be more relevant in people's minds, and therefore people are more likely to listen and pay attention. And I think, so I don't think the film has a short life by any means, but I think the next 10 months are going to be pretty critical in getting the story out there, just so people, just so as many eyeballs can see it as possible. And then also, just when I first met Tori, I bluntly asked her, it's all about that communication again. I was like, why are you agreeing to let me invade your life for a documentary? And she said, it kind of comes up in the film. It's a storyline we had to cut a lot out of, but she's in a lot of debt just from Paralympic fencing. And that's an issue with a lot of USA athletes. There's just so much of it is self-funded, and so many of them don't have sponsors and aren't even allowed to have sponsors, that they're just funding themselves to maybe never even get to the Olympics or Paralympics. And so Tori recognized, she said, hey, if this film is good, which I think it is, maybe there's a chance people could donate to her GoFundMe or something and help fund her efforts, because, we do touch on it in the film, not as much as originally, but she's in tens of thousands of dollars of debt just from trying to pursue this dream of hers to fence on the world stage. And it's crazy that USA athletes have to go through this when most other countries have a sports ministry that does most of the funding for them. But in the US, there's people like Tori and pretty much anyone else on a Paralympic team who they do their sport on the side, and then they have to work full time just to keep themselves afloat. And it's just mind boggling. So I recognize, there is that benefit to Tori. If the film is successful and people are interested in her story, she might get some donations out of it. And I think with Paralympic funding rules, that's really all she can get. People can donate to her GoFundMe or whatnot, but
the Paralympic rules different than regular Olympic rule. I mean, I think it seems like a lot of things are kind of changing, and especially with college sports and the NIL, name, image, and likeness, and how that's kind of changing. Is that, I guess I already asked the question, but how does that relate to do Paralympics athletes have less of a chance to make money than Olympic athletes?
They do, and there have been strides. Paralympic athletes now get, I believe it's the same amount of money for winning medals as Olympic athletes. It's something along those lines. It was a ruling a couple of years ago, so that was a big stride. But at the same time, just, you have to qualify for the Paralympics first of all. Then you have to finish in the top 3 to even get any sort of semblance of money back, which is mind-boggling. And then, I might be wrong here, but I'm trying to remember my research that Olympic athletes, I don't think can be sponsored at all, or potential Team USA Olympic athletes, but Paralympic athletes do have the potential to be sponsored in one form or another. But again, I mean, that's a far guarantee of ever happening. So
yeah, I mean, I think that I think there's a certain embargo time period from what I remember. I know a certain time, but I think at a certain time before the Olympics, there's a cutoff, and then a certain time after the Olympics when you can have individual sponsorships. I think Louis Vuitton did like some sort of campaign several years ago, or with Phelps, right? I don't remember exactly who it was with, but the embargo was kind of like right on the edge of that. When I was at CU, it was a big issue because Jeremy Bloom, an Olympic mogul skier, was on the football team, and he couldn't get money to pay his ski coaches. So he literally had to choose. He went to court and he lost in court, and just it was absolutely ridiculous. The NCAA was not letting a U.S. athlete raise money just to cover his cost of coaching when he's going to represent not only the country but his school and in athletics.
Yeah, it's another one of those crazy issues that the more I worked on this film, the more I realized what a crazy problem it is in this country. And I think a lot of people just assume, oh, you're a great professional athlete, you must have a lot of money. It's like me working in local news reporting. People are like, oh, you're on TV, you must have a lot of money. It's like, no, it's, throw those assumptions out the door. These athletes don't make much, at least until they're at the top of the top level, and most of them don't ever get to that point. So it's just, it's absurd. And, a lot of sports, like you mentioned, college athletes face similar issues. But,
luckily that's going to get taken care of pretty quickly. I guess, there's a lot of goals with the film festival. One of the things that I'm, going to try and do, and I had a conversation yesterday with somebody about kind of, forming a foundation, because right now we have fiscal sponsorship with an arts organization in Houston, which is good because I would like to help them, bring more production to Houston and help them with their funding. But what we'll probably do is start a foundation that we can pair athletes, pro athletes, with causes, so we can get them to make a monetary donation, and have a database of athletes and their causes, and then pair those athletes with a filmmaker who's doing a film on one of the causes. So if there was a professional athlete that had a relative that was passionate about Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, we could pair them with you guys. They could give you some money to help with funding, but more importantly, they could use their voice and their social media following to prop up the film and spread the word. So if you find, that's one thing. If you find any athletes, professional athletes that support the cause, definitely let me know, because it's probably something that I thought would be more down the road, but it's probably more necessary to do sooner. The other interesting thing, obviously, as a first-year festival, kind of navigating this whole crazy world with COVID and film festivals, it's been very interesting because I've had lots of really good phone calls and lots of phone calls that don't go so well. And I've had one person tell me that, I'd rather shoot myself in the foot than start something new right now. Like, okay, well, the problem with that is that if you don't try to start stuff new while this is happening, then once this is over, what are you going to do? And we're lucky that we have not, it's basically me and like a couple people just helping donate their time right now. So it's something we've been around for 5 or 10 years and have a lot of overhead. But we're definitely going to happen. I'm surprised that when this first hit, more film festivals didn't transition to more drive-in screenings. I know some have more recently, but drive-in screenings were already getting more popular before COVID hit. And, it's a beautiful outlet, I think, to have people still come together in a safe way. We're looking at doing outdoor screenings, socially distanced. There's a great public-private partnership park called Discovery Green downtown. So we're going to have screenings down there. And then assuming we can have some in-person stuff that's more interactive, we'll have sports activities for kids, which that's been a big kind of part of the film festival, is not just to show the films, but expose kids to different sports. So I know that you like to rock climb. So hopefully you can find a film that has some kind of rock climbing aspect to it, and then put up, a bunch of climbing walls, so kids can kind of come during the day, watch the films with their family, and then learn how to rock climb. So they're just kind of exposed, to more things, and they can, they may have never tried to rock climb. Houston doesn't have a lot of rocks to climb, but they've got a few rock climbing gyms. So we're looking at, things like that. It's also been very interesting to see, I didn't know how many submissions we would get. And, especially as a first year, and kind of, we've done a little bit of press, but haven't done too much. I guess one question I would ask you: how did you hear about the film festival?
I'm assuming Film Freeway. Assuming you're on there. Yeah. Brian and I took some time, and we made a list of kind of targeted festivals, whether specific or just genre, and sports festivals were obviously one genre. We're like, okay, we got to apply to all those, international especially too, because our film's mostly in Poughkeepsie, New York area, but originally, it's got the international component, and originally,
with the Olympics.
I was supposed to go to Brazil to film her there, and then to Tokyo. We expected, fingers crossed, she was going to there. So, we consider the film internationally, and then ended up not being nearly as much as originally planned. And then we applied to several festivals, about women in sports, disability type festivals, and then that's the benefit of something like Film Freeway, is just kind of discovering a lot of those in one place. And we hired a former classmate of ours from Columbia. I say we hired. She was one of our test audience members, and she loved the film so much, she asked if she could help some way. I said, can you help us apply and get into film festivals? And so she's been doing a lot of that work, which is nice. So we're happy to have Kat on board helping us with that, especially because Brian and I are full-time working now, and it's been harder to find the time to do stuff like this. So I'm imagining it's somehow through Film Freeway that Kat originally found you.
Okay.
We're like, of course, apply to that. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So, so that's one of the things that's really interesting with the submissions, because we've gotten a good amount of submissions. And, one of the things I'm doing, especially with the protests going on, and, making a big push for racial equality, like how do we extend that conversation, and how do we, fit that into the film festival as an educational tool. And it really, as soon as kind of, the George Floyd murder happened, and me being from Houston, the film festival taking place in there, and him being from Houston, it's like, well, we can, I know for the first year, I don't know how many films we're going to get, but we can focus on athlete activists from historical perspectives. So Muhammad Ali, Althea Gibson, obviously, Billie Jean King, what she did for women in the LGBTQ community, and having the battle of sexes in Houston. So we're planning on showing some content of them. And then I actually got a submission on Sir Philip Craven, who was a Paralympic basketball player, and he then became the president of the International Paralympic Committee, and he's the one that took the Paralympics from like a niche event into the kind of global event that it is today. So I think, my gut, and just from, watching the film and talking to you and seeing this one, is that we can probably do some really cool programming with your film, with the film on him. And then there's a local family that plays wheelchair basketball, that are the two brothers that were both in a really bad car accident when they were younger, both paralyzed below the waist. And one of them is currently playing wheelchair basketball at Alabama, and the other one just signed like a couple weeks ago to play wheelchair basketball at Alabama next year too. And that's, again, kind of using sports to sports has been a huge part of their lives, and using that to kind of overcome these obstacles that, terrible tragedy they've had to go through. So I think that, that's kind of my initial plan. I think that, talk with your team too, and then we can kind of, if there's a way to do some interactive stuff around wheelchair sports at the festival, I don't know if that's, I guess we'll have to kind of wait and see kind of what the possibilities are. But if there's other ways that you can think of doing special events, certainly let me know.
Yeah, it's to try to do wheelchair fencing, you see there's this whole platform setup they have to have, unless you're Tori lugging your own weights around way down your platform. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's tough to say, especially in Houston. I'm trying to think of other team members who might be in that area, but I think a lot of the teams in like North Carolina and Ohio, but if there's someone in the Texas or the Houston area, that would make it much more convenient and easy. But off the top of my head, I can't think of anyone who's there, but I'll get in touch with Brandon Diet. He's a manager who's in the film a couple of times.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
See if he knows anyone in the area. Cause yeah, that'd be cool. I've been meaning to try to do some fencing myself now, ever since I fully anticipated by the end of production, I would have fenced at least once just to see what it's like. And then of course, never had the chance. So it's something I want to do, especially after working on the film, and hopefully, people who see the film are really like, oh, I want to try fencing, whether it's able-bodied or wheelchair. But yeah, it's,
Tori's going to beat you, right?
Absolutely. It's so funny. The first day I filmed her, just fencing all the able-bodied people sitting down, she kicked all their asses, and they knew they were going to get their ass kicked, and she just dominated them. It was fun. It was fun to watch. So yeah, she's really good.